Joining us now, Sheriff David Clarke, America's Sheriff. Sheriff Clarke, nice to have you with us.
How you doing, John? Good morning to your listeners.
Sheriff, when you're on, I'm doing great. Do you think the Supreme Court, here's the question today, the big question, the only question, is SCOTUS going to take up the 17 now state, the Texas lawsuit, now enjoined by 17 states? Are they going to take it up today, or are they going to perform what I would consider to be a dereliction of duty?
Wow. Boy, you come with the tough questions right out of the box. I wish I knew the answer to that. The courts have been disappointing, although this is where the Trump campaign wanted to be before the United States Supreme Court. Now, will they answer the door? It's anybody's guess, but there are some constitutional issues here that they do need to at least listen. So I would like to think that in our society of functioning institutions, you have all of these states. So you have a conflict here between states, and that is one of the things that the United States Supreme Court deals with. There's no, they're the court of jurisdiction in these matters here. So I if they follow the Constitution, I think they'll at least listen. They've asked for briefs. It doesn't mean that they're going to hear it, but that's a good sign. They want to hear from these states that are named, these 4 states. So we'll have to wait and see. But, again, I'm not going to get my hopes up over any of this because it's been nothing but a big letdown. Every time you see something, you hear something that sounds, hey, we might get a win here. Maybe we'll get some justice. But here's the thing that bothers me the most, John. You have all this talk about, courts in these states, and, they don't want to disenfranchise voters or even take the chance of doing it by throwing votes out. But what they're doing instead is they're disenfranchising the legal votes. So if there are some corrupt ballots in there, if there are some illegal votes, it disenfranchises me and you and everybody else, including the people that voted for Biden. It still disenfranchises them. So I don't understand why everybody's concerned. When I say everybody, I'm talking about the courts. They're concerned, they don't want to take the chance of throwing any ballots out. Well, then, they're throwing mine out by not acting on these corrupt ballots.
Mm-hmm. I think today is one of those days you're going to figure out where your country is today. And, Sheriff, I got to tell you, I'm going to be so disappointed if the Supreme Court justices don't take this case up. Because, as I said earlier, this to me is a watershed moment in the Republic. Either you're going to take this up when 17 states have enjoined it, or you're going to basically say, I don't want to get involved in politics. Well, it's all politics, right? It's the election integrity of the country. And I don't even know what the reason would be. And if they give some mealy-mouthed reason like not standing or any of that nonsense I've heard, I just want this taken up. I don't care how it ends. I want the evidence to be exposed. I want a public record. I want transparency. I mean, the Trump campaign just filed a lawsuit in Georgia last night alleging that up to 450,000 votes were cast illegally. I want you to grasp that. There's 5 million people that voted. They're alleging that 400,000, which is 8% of the votes, were cast illegally. I mean, if you don't fix this, if you don't get to the bottom of this, Republicans are never going to win another meaningful election, including the runoff on January the 5th, because the Democrats have found a avenue of theft, which they will perfect. Every time it'll get better if there's no platform to stop them. Sheriff, does that make sense?
It makes all the sense in the world. First of all, that number is staggering, 450,000. The problem is, which ones are the spoiled ones and which ones are not, now that they've thrown all these things together into one pot. But what I would like to see out of the United States Supreme Court, follow the Constitution. It's in Article 2. It's up to the state legislators to decide who should get that state's electoral votes. And so I think that the best that we can hope for, they're not going to, the Supreme Court's not going to order any state to throw out a certain amount of ballots. They're just not going to go to that deep end of the pool. However, by the Constitution, the state legislatures play a role. I would like to see the Supreme Court, with all these irregularities, with the fact that some people are being disenfranchised, throw it back into the state legislatures and say, hey, Pennsylvania state legislature, you decide who's getting the electors. Hey, Michigan, Wisconsin, the legislatures, you decide, who to seat at the electoral college coming up later this month. And then that way the Supreme Court has not picked anybody, right? There's no president by judicial fiat here. They follow the Constitution. They throw it back to the states. They say, this is your right under the Constitution. You got a mess here. We're remanding this back to the Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia state legislators. And that would be, I think, the best outcome for everybody. Because then, like I said, nobody's vote's been thrown out. No president by judicial fiat. The Constitution says the state legislatures decide what electors to send. So let's just follow the Constitution. That's pretty black and white to me.
So that's all you have to do. I cannot even for the life of me fathom why they wouldn't take this up. Like, what would be the reason? I don't want to get involved. We had a story in the Georgia Star the other day. A young 27-year-old House of Representatives member of Georgia, Republican, Colton Moore, young fella. He thought that Kemp should call a special session. And so there was a petition. We were trying to get one. Of course, it failed in the Senate. Out of 34 Republicans, they needed 29. They got 12 votes. All of the establishment leadership squashed it, so it went nowhere. In the House, he was going around trying to whip votes, get people to sign it. They needed 91 out of 106. And it's up on the Georgia Star. So Colton Moore reported to us, stories on it, that a lot of the veteran legislators that he talked to didn't want to sign it because they were afraid Antifa would come to town, they'd get doxxed, they'd be written up in the AJC, they didn't want to deal with it. If they changed the votes, mobs would come and burn down Atlanta. They just didn't want to get involved. They just want the whole thing to go away. And he's 27 years old. And our position was, why are you there? Like, why are you even bothered to be a state representative if you can't even stand up for your constituents because you're afraid your car's going to get keyed? Like, is that what we've come to now, Sheriff? Mob rule?
There's no courage when it comes to the political class anymore, anywhere in the United States. The only person that has demonstrated courage in the last 4 years has been President Trump. Because you have to have an attitude of fear not, be not afraid. And, I understand that some of these things can be a little anxiety-filled, and when you start getting threats and you start getting doxxed, I've been doxxed. It's quite disturbing, but at the same time, you got to realize when you're in these positions, you sought that position for a reason. You weren't drafted for those positions. You sought those positions, and you said you wanted to serve. Well, damn it, stand up and serve then, for heaven's sakes, and deal with, or otherwise, you know what, just leave. Mm-hmm. And,
leave.
Let somebody else do it. Let somebody else do it.
I want to get to Wisconsin. You're there. You've been there forever. You were sheriff of Milwaukee. There's alleged voter irregularities in Milwaukee. I know you've had time to look at it. You're very familiar with the area because you were the sheriff there. You got elected in Milwaukee County Sheriff multiple times. What is the allegation? Wisconsin is part of this suit. What, in your knowledge, Sheriff Clarke, is the allegation in what went down in Milwaukee?
All right, there's two things that are going on, and the challenge has been in Milwaukee and Dane County, the two most populous counties. Actually, Waukesha might be second, but anyway, heavily Democrat. But the issues are the commissioners, the election commissioners in Milwaukee and Dane County told people publicly, put out announcements to just check the box that says I'm permanently confined And if you check that box, you don't have to show voter ID. All right? That is illegal. As a matter of fact, the state Supreme Court slapped those commissioners down and said, you're not following the law, stop putting that announcement out. But the announcement already went out. So I guess there's like 250,000 of these mail-ins where they were checked as permanently confined to their residence and don't have to show a voter ID, when in normal elections you might get 25,000. So now they get 250,000. So that's one. The other is what they call ballot curing. The ballots come in, the mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. The envelope has to be filled out properly. You have to sign it, you have to date it, you have to put your address, and you have to have it witnessed by somebody. Some of these ballots were coming in without the envelope being properly filled out, and they were ordered by the election commissioners. The clerks were, just fill in the information. You cannot do that, John. You cannot cure that ballot. It's an illegal ballot, and you have to throw it out. Now, you could notify the person and say, hey, we got your ballot here, but it's not filled out. You're going to have to come in here and correct. The voter can come in and correct it at the election office. The election clerk cannot fix that ballot. So that was done. Those are the two issues. Ballot curing and it's permanently confined when the people aren't, but they were told that so they wouldn't have to show ID to vote. And we have voter ID in this state.
So Wisconsin has voter ID, but if you did a mail-in ballot, there's no voter ID.
Yes, there is. There is, unless there's a provision. For instance, let's say you're disabled.
Right.
Let's say you're truly disabled.
Right.
And you can't get out of your house to go get an ID. Most people, first of all, they have it anyway. Well, then you just check the box, and then that gives you that out. But what was happening is people were just doing that who weren't permanently confined, and therefore they could get around the voter ID. Maybe they're a first-time voter, right? So they don't have an ID on file, and you have to have it on file. When you request your ballot, see, that was the thing, too, with the mail-in ballots. They weren't requested. Absentee, you have to request it, and then they have your ID on file already. So you don't need to show it when you vote. You already have it on there. Mm-hmm. So that's what the mess is here. The law wasn't followed. It's like everywhere else, John, where these problems are in these states. The law was not followed. And that's what the Supreme Court has to take up. You didn't follow the laws of your state. States run elections. There's no federal requirements, but the only federal requirement is you have to have established laws that you cannot change in the middle of the game. This stuff's all changing of the law by people who don't have the authority. Only the legislature, we're back to that, only the legislature can change the law, and they have to do it, John, before the election, not during the election. And no state legislature has done it. Courts have altered it. Courts in Pennsylvania have said, yeah, you can accept the ballot a week after it comes in. No, that's not what the Pennsylvania law is. The legislature can change that, but they can't change it in the middle of an election.
I think that if the Supreme Court doesn't take this up, why are they there? That's all I can say. Why are they there? Why even have it? And then, you know what? If they don't take it up, they deserve to be diluted, because that is what's going to happen. The problem in Georgia, Sheriff, is that the elected officials here that are yelling at Georgia voters that they have to get out and vote in this runoff to save the republic don't get it. They won't stand behind them. They won't challenge the fraudulent election. They won't represent them. They won't fight for them. And so they think that Newt Gingrich thinks he can send an email chastising voters in Georgia, and they're going to come out and do what he says. Newt Gingrich is a relic. Newt Gingrich should be in the Vatican with his wife. Nobody cares what Newt Gingrich says. And here's what's happened, Sheriff. Here's what I've learned on the ground here in 5 weeks. The Trump movement, let's call it the deplorables, the movement is so vast and so big and so motivated, it makes the Tea Party look like child's play. And what has happened now, Sheriff, is that the movement has eclipsed its current crop of Republican leaders. And when this is over, regardless of what happens today at 3 o'clock, there is going to be a disruption, a shakeout, an awakening and upheaval of politicians and media like you've never seen. You think about conservative media, right? It was kind of like the big four. Fox News, done. Drudge, done. Rush Limbaugh the other day threw in with the other side. I know he's old and sick. I understand it. Hit piece on Lynn Wood from McConnell's office. Done. There's going to be a shakeout, Sheriff. It's coming.
And it probably needs to happen. All right. It started to happen in 2016, in November 2016, with this outsider, and I say that with all due respect to the president, this outsider, this businessman from Queens. He came in and broke up busted up the party, started tipping over tables, breaking into China, not the country, the dishes and so forth. And he basically took that party over, okay? But they've been fighting back against him. They hope to see him gone. They'll be glad to see him gone, some of these people silently. But you're right. The base, they're not going anywhere. The base is not going to have it. So there'll be a reckoning about that. But the problem in Georgia right now, it's the mail-in ballots. It's the cheating, is the infrastructure for cheating by the Democrats is already in place. Mm-hmm. It's called the mail-in ballot. So, there's two fronts that we have to fight this thing on. And it's, and we always have to fight, roller skating backwards up a mountain. We always got to fight from a defensive standpoint, and that's frustrating too because the Republican leadership, or lack of leadership, is just not there. Okay, no stones, no courage, won't fight, and this is what the base is tired of. They've had it, which is why they fell in love with Donald Trump. They saw someone who truly cared about them, who wasn't in this thing for himself, wasn't in it for the money. The man doesn't even take a salary, for heaven's sakes. I know he doesn't need it, but what, you think Joe Biden's going to turn down the presidential salary? I think it's about $450,000. Joe Biden's collecting a pension, first of all, federal pension for being in the Senate.
He's going
and
to take
now
it
he's
all.
going to get. Sure, he is.
He's going to take it.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. So I want this reckoning to take place. We need a shaking out because it's the conservative base. It's not the Republican Party. It's the conservative base. And I'm talking grassroots when I say base. I'm not talking these elites.
Right.
All right? Some of them that you mentioned. Those are the elites.
Right.
We're done with those people.
That's right. Newt Gingrich needs to go back to the Vatican with his wife, right? And nobody cares what he says. Nobody cares what any of these people say. People are mad that I'm here stirring things up. That's what I've heard. Excuse me?
You're a disruptor. You should be.
I mean, I let people call into my show. I give them a voice. The Republican elites in Georgia want them silenced. Sheriff, thank you. I got to run.